Mike Phillip filling in for him on Wednesday, October 15th, 2014. We've got a great guest lined up for you today. We're not going to be taking any calls in the first hour, but if you want to hang on, we'll deal with anything you want to talk about during the second. Let's get right into it. To begin with, I'd like to read you a quote from Dr. Benjamin Rush, one of the founding fathers of the United States of America. Unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, the time will come when medicine will organize into an undercover dictatorship to restrict the art of healing to one class of men and deny equal privileges to the others. The Constitution of the Republic should make a special privilege for medical freedom as well as religious freedom. Now, that's the United States. Here in Canada, we have a situation where we have a so-called free healthcare system that is absolutely destroying our provincial economies. It is unsustainable at best. Now, back in 2013, the Toronto Sun was reporting that between 38,000 and 43,000 Canadians die every year due to medical errors, and I bet you that's a lowball estimate. In the United States, it's figured around 780,000. I bet you that's lowballing too. Now here's the deal. What if you don't die? What if you get messed up from a botched surgery? What if you get an infection that leaves you with irreversible effects for the rest of your life, that leave you unable to take care of your family or yourself? How did we get to this situation? Well, to talk about that today, we have the Managing Director of the Canadian Coalition for Health Freedom, Truman Tuck. Mr. Tuck, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So,
really
Mr.
pleased
Tuck,
to be here.
Yeah, if we could start off today, please tell our listening audience a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, well, basically, I've been involved in what I consider to be personal self-care responsibility for my own health since the late 60s. And I discovered fairly early on in the mid-70s when I was trying to be responsible for treating myself and researching the truth of and benefits of the two primary world's healthcare systems. The number one leading system in the world still is what we refer to as traditional natural remedies / dietary food supplements. A lot of effort goes into the pharmaceutical industry trying to suppress and destroy that primary care system. And we find in Canada that with the changes on January 1st, 2004, when the federal government put in what they call the natural health product regulations, they basically made pharmaceutical drugs of all of our traditional medicines and dietary food supplements, changing the course of Canadian history in that regard. And those are the problems that we're now dealing with, the regulatory interference and restrictions of our products.
Okay, so could you get into just a little bit of the history about how this came about? Because it wasn't always this way.
Well, actually, in a sense, ironically, when we were doing our research, we first started in about 1995 as an organization, and our main organization that started is actually Friends of Freedom International, which is a consumer-based organization. When we ran into these problems in 95, 96, and 97, we found that in the Canadian and British system, the medical doctors had forced their cartel monopoly on our society for 4 centuries. We had evidence back to the 3rd year of the reign of Henry VIII, would you believe? So
it has been going on actually a lot longer than I even thought. And
yes.
But what this boils down to is individual freedom of, how you're going to treat your own body and what kind of information you're going to subject yourself or your family to. What specifically have you been doing to raise awareness or gain people's individual freedom in this area?
Well, we've been lobbying and trying to stop the pharmaceutical conversion of our products in Ottawa for 19 years now. And we've implemented in a number of different times over the years. We had worked with the Dr. James Lundy and the Dr. Colin Carey 2 or 3 parliaments ago to introduce a private members bill called Bill C-420, which many of your listeners in Canada will be familiar with. And in that, we had determined that the only way we could have the right of self-medication with full information is to amend the provisions of the Food and Drugs Act that were put into place in 1920, 1927, and 1934 by the medical establishment to prohibit us going in that direction.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I was looking at your Friends of Freedom International website.
Yes.
And you guys are actively involved in educating people, for instance, about your right not to let your child get a vaccination. Could you go into that a little bit, please?
Yes, well, that's one of the examples where a lot of families are not aware, whether it's for their children and their family, or even with nurses and people working in healthcare clinics, they're often intimidated into being forced to against their will to take vaccinations. And so we've spent decades now trying to teach people that under the Canadian Constitution, you do have legal rights to refuse, whether in an employee role or as a caring family member for your children. And so that's one of the aspects that we provide. If you go to our website, which is www.fofi.ca, there's a keyword search there, and on the major themes that are affecting us, such as hazards from pharmaceutical drugs, vaccines, GMOs, fluoride in the water, you'll find that we have massive archives of high-quality articles and information so that people can self-educate themselves.
All right. So, we've allowed this situation to continue on around us, and in the meantime, we've been absolutely devastated by allopathic reductionism. And Benito Mussolini defined fascism as the marriage of business and government. They legislate their own laws. They make you do the things and think the way they want you to. Tell me this. Have you seen any gains in medical freedom amongst the minds of your countrymen?
I view it at this point that because of the imposing of this pharmaceutical class onto our dietary food supplements effective January 1st, 2004, and they're tightening up the enforcement now, the Health Canada, for the first time in history, is trying to close the border to personal imports of products that we want as consumers, and they're also now surveying retail stores and health practitioners in the marketplace to force them into a situation where nothing in this country can be on a shelf, even whether it's a health practitioner or a retail store, that does not have either a DIN number, which is a drug, or a natural health product number, which is a subclass of drugs. They're trying to totally eradicate any choice that we have in the marketplace for anything other than the products they have approved.
So they want to put a lockdown on what you have access to, basically, based on their words, definitions, and terms. Could you speak a little bit to how they use legalese to entrap you into thinking the way they want?
Well, the whole process, in 1997, our groups filed a lawsuit to stop the July 1st, 1997 first attempt to basically make pharmaceutical drugs out of all of our traditional natural remedies and dietary food supplements. We were successful with stopping that first attempt, and they were really sneaky. They realized that we had created one of the largest uprisings in Canadian history, so they deliberately set about to ensure that when they came back in 2001 and 2002, they created a shell game to con the Canadian businesses into compliance. And by a shell game, I mean that instead of insisting upon mandatory drug site licenses and mandatory drug numbers for our products, they created a new definition called natural health product. And they made the natural health products an application that you had to make, and they force you to make a claim when you make that application. What the industry didn't realize is that under the existing Food and Drugs Act, if you make a claim on a food product, it becomes a drug, a pharmaceutical drug, under the 1920 and 1927 amendments that were made by these same cartels to our Food and Drugs Act. So that they basically have conned the entire Canadian health food industry into submitting to a pharmaceutical drug class. And now they're slowly proceeding to close the borders and to weaken the ingredients. And, of course, the costs have gone up.
Mm-hmm. So how effective has it been going through traditional legal channels to combat this? I mean, do you find yourself stonewalled? Do you find yourself making deals with the devil and getting ripped off every time? Or what is there a better way to go? We talk about grassroots movements. Please speak to that.
Well, we've learned over the years. I've been involved now in about a dozen or so lawsuits involving the feds. But the problem with the lawsuits is the feds drag them out for 3 to 5 years or more. I'm still actively involved in a lawsuit that we filed in September of 2005, and it's still in the courts today over these similar issues. A new lawsuit was filed by one of our colleagues in 2012, and it's still in the courts. So one of the ways that we go about this now, there is a bill in the Senate called C-17. It's nicknamed Vanessa's bill. Mm-hmm. And people don't understand that that bill is there to amend the Food and Drugs Act, and the sound of it is a good sound, like, protecting Canadians against prescription drugs. What the Canadians don't realize is that we stopped a bill called C-51 a number of years ago that would give Health Canada more power, and many of the provisions that were in C-51 have been snuck in the back door of this bill C-17 now. And the majority of people in this country don't realize that there's that back door, more power to Health Canada bureaucrats, which is the last thing we can do. Now, our group is organized what we call Putting People First e-directive system on our website. So anybody who wants our dietary food supplements, traditional remedies, to return to a non-pharmaceutical drug category in Canada needs to go to that website right now. We're attempting to force the Canadian Senate to add 3 amendments that our group has drafted.
Mr. Tuck, I got to interrupt you. I hear the music. We're going to a break. Mike Phillips filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden with Truman Tuck. We'll be back after this. We're live on Fire Currency now. Mike Phillips filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden. Before the break, we were talking to Truman Tuck, Managing Director of the Canadian Coalition for Health Freedom. And the majority of our listening audience is in the United States, but you better pay attention because this affects you too. It's time for people to start realizing that your government is a dog on a leash, and if you let go of that leash, it's going to do what it's going to do. And that's not always going to be in your best interest. Now, Mr. Tuck, it seems to me that this is bigger than just North America. There seems to be a worldwide push to control all of this. Could you speak to Codex Alimentarius and the power that the World Health Organization wields?
Yes, our group has attended, I've personally attended, I think, 8 or 9 Codex meetings in different parts of the world over the years. And you're correct, everything is interconnected. But a lot of it is now centered on North America because the U.S. and Canada have been very dedicated to health freedom, as you're well aware, and there's been a real push for people to take responsibility for their own health by choosing the vitamins and herbs and things. So what happens in the U.S. is they stop the problem we're having in Canada with the definitions within the Food and Drugs Act equivalent in 1994 when they passed the Dietary Supplements Health Education Act. Now, what is happening is the Americans should be very aware that this regime that they put into effect in Canada is being exported as a global new model by the pharmacy industry and will try to undo DSHEA in the States. We already have evidence that that's occurring because of the regulatory cooperation between Health Canada and the FDA in the States. So this is, for your American audience, this is a very serious problem as well, and it's a looming problem that's going to get worse.
Very serious. Well, that's the thing. We were known to be free, and we jealously guarded our freedoms. And so, in order to implement this worldwide, like you said, they really had to concentrate on the United States and Canada, because if they bring us down, the rest of it's going to fold like a cheap suit no matter what they have left. And America, you gotta understand this affects you in a big, huge way. Our soil is depleted. You cannot get the nutrients you need just from food alone. You've got to supplement, just like you've got to get clean water, just like you've got to put a roof over your head. It is that important. Now, we've seen an absolute breakdown in the health of Canadians. They're talking about, I was just reading in Global News, Edmonton the other day, that they're talking 1 in 10 in Alberta, they figure, is going to have type 2 diabetes over the next 5 years. They're saying that every Canadian, if every single North American, actually, I was just reading, and this is their projection, will suffer some form of cancer over their lifetime if they live long enough. So what they're doing is they're shifting to this debate. Should we have physician-assisted suicide? And Hippocrates would be rolling in his grave. Could you speak to that, Mr. Tuck?
Well, that is a very complex subject, not something that we get into specifically, because how far the informed freedom of choice should go, what's legal within each of the two countries, is a very heated debate. So we don't deal with that. We deal with more the fact that you should have a right of choice of what you rely upon for health practitioners, for ingesting, for applying and using dietary food supplements and traditional natural remedies. We stay more to that theme.
Fair enough. It's all about freedom. So for those who don't know the actual definition of Codex Alimentarius, could you give us that?
Well, it was formed as part of it's basically an international standards process where they originally, when they started picking on our industry, they were claiming that they were looking after the global public health, trying to standardize the trade, and their mantra is that they exist to facilitate trade and protect the global consumer. But anybody who's attended a Codex meeting knows basically it's an extension of the mega corporations, and they use it as a means of increasing the regulatory burden so that small local community businesses in our countries cannot compete and grow as independent businesses. So it's a very, very evil and insipid creature, and it wastes enormous amount of government resources on things that the government shouldn't even be involved in.
So, yeah, at the same time as they're doing this, they've got it all actuated out, and they know that this is going to bankrupt the provinces. So, I mean, it's unreal. Mr. Tuck, I hear the music. We got a break. Mike Phillip filling in for Dr. Peter Glidden. Fascinating conversation with Truman Tuck. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. We're live on Fire Your MD Now Radio. Now, the title of the show is Fire Your MD. I would just like to stress that we are not against all medical doctors, okay? They're great if you get run over, shot, stabbed, fall off a cliff. If you got a broken arm, you want an MD. But if you have a chronic pain or disease issue, run. If you see one with a camera on the long end of a snaky deal, run. Now, Mr. Tuck, we were talking during the break there about the fact that the majority of our listening audience is in the United States, and people are very interested in what they can do, empowerment on an individual level. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes. One of the things that I did a number of years ago is I got together with a medical doctor named Dr. Carolyn Dean, and she and I co-authored a book called Death by Modern Medicine. And it's an award-winning book. And you were referencing at the beginning of the show that the modern medicine in North America kills something equivalent to 700,000 people a year. That statistic actually came out of our book from 2005. It was 783,000 deaths that we were able to document out of medical records that were being killed in North America, in the U.S. specifically. Now, we've done there's been an update recently. It's now over 1 million deaths are being caused every year in the greater USA area, including Canada. So we have a situation where that translates, the 783,000 translates into an equivalent of 7 jumbo jets full of people dying every day.
Yeah, and if that was the situation, you know that the FAA would be all over it.
That's correct. So the thing that's so important, you can't have self-empowerment without intelligent knowledge of the risks and benefits of the choices that you're making or wanting to make. So that's the secret to self-empowerment in the area of what we call informed freedom of choice in not only healthcare, but associated lifestyle. You can't separate healthcare from your lifestyle.
No,
You have to look
absolutely
at yourself as a whole. You have to look at yourself as a holistic entity, holistic human being.
Absolutely. And you know what? That's the approach we take as well. We believe that the body has been endowed with a God-given wisdom. It wants to fix itself. It's constantly trying to fix itself. It just needs a few raw materials, specifically 60 minerals, 16 vitamins, 12 amino and 3 fatty acids. And if you give it what it needs, it will just fix itself. I've seen absolute miracles. So you worked with this medical doctor on this book. Give out the name of that book again.
It's called Death by Modern Medicine.
Excellent. Is that available on Amazon?
Yes, it is. If you do a keyword search, you'll find the website. It's also available through most of the entities. It's a hard copy and electronic copy.
Excellent. So I want to ask you, what kind of attitude, obviously you deal with lawmakers on a regular basis and doctors in dealing with these things, what kind of attitude do you see from them? Do they care? Do they feel trapped? What are you running into?
Well, the statistics have indicated for a good number of years that something in excess of 60% of the medical doctors in North America believe in and rely upon what we call our traditional natural remedies or dietary food supplements for their own treatment and that of their loved ones. Mm-hmm. So a large percentage of medical doctors personally believing in the product is not the problem. The problem is the regulatory interference that occurs at every possible level of society. Now, I'll give you an example. It's a Canadian example, but it has happened in the States as well. We have evidence that in the year 2000, the British Columbia Medical Association set up a specific project called Project 2000. And in that project, their whole plan was to ensure that in the province of BC, no provincial funding would ever go to any non-medical doctor healthcare professional. So they were after the chiropractors, the naturopaths, the Chinese, traditional medicine people, and that is biased. Those two biases, one being that the government structure does everything possible to prevent self-medication. They believe that if you self-medicate and don't go to a doctor, you're going to harm yourself. So the nanny state mentality is in Washington and Ottawa that we have to protect our citizens from making stupid mistakes on their own without getting primary counsel and direction from a medical doctor. That's the root of the tree of evil that you're talking about on this show that affects everything that you and myself are about.
Well, absolutely, and since we put it in their hands, and that's the thing, the only thing that evil needs to succeed is for good men to do nothing, and while we're all busy going about our lives thinking that somebody else is going to take care of it, meanwhile, it's grown into this monster of a situation that we have right now. But the fact is, we have, at this time in human history, more information available at our fingertips than ever before. So, it's a situation where you can just go with the status quo, take your health care, and run to them with everything that happens, get an antibiotic or whatever the case might be, or you can get the information that's available to you, strengthen your body, and take your health into your own hands. So, and on this show, we constantly hear people talking about loved ones that have been killed. It's just amazing. So the situation in the United States seems to have really turned a corner with Obamacare. I mean, I've got family in the United States. I'm half American. And I actually remember my cousin saying once, no American wants socialized health care. No American wants that. How were they convinced that Obamacare or any form of socialized situation would be the way to go?
Well, what happens, unfortunately, and this is an irony because freedom in Canada has had different pathways than freedom in the States in every aspect, not only in healthcare, but in governance and structure and everything. And one of the problems that we have in the States and in Canada is the enormous influence that the big cartels, and the big cartels are made of big food, big government, big unions, and big pharma, obviously, and the related investment cartels. So you mentioned earlier about the definition of fascism being the merging of the state and private interests.
Yep.
In the U.S., what the term actually is in the U.S. terminology is called statism. Have you heard of that expression before?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so what we have in North America is called statism, and it's specifically where large, ultra-wealthy people get together with the government and the people that influence the government, such as your president and my prime minister, and then they shape the laws and regulations and hurdles that affect the individual citizens and the small businesses in a way to raise the regulatory burden so high that only people with extremely deep pockets can afford to do business any longer. And then they help each other out. They help build the government bureaucracies. They help build the private sector. And basically they turn us into slaves. Basically, they just view us as a way to exploit and use us no different than farm animals.
Like a walking ham sandwich, yeah. Something to be fed on. But at the same time, it's our fault because we allowed this to happen, right? I mean, if more people took it into their hands, we could reverse this pretty quickly.
Well, that's the whole purpose. In 1995, when a group of us got together in the Kingston, Belleville, Ontario, Canada area, and we're a global organization, so we do influence U.S. as well as Canadian and international activities. As I said, I've attended probably more Codex than anybody you've ever talked to. I don't think you've known somebody that's been 7 or 8 times to Codexes, have you?
I do not, sir.
Yeah. So if you're whether you're American or Canadian, it's one thing to individually struggle to learn. It's something else to join together in a non-political sense, but do what political people do, which is to help each other organize.
Hence the definition of grassroots.
Yeah. Yeah, so to us, we decided a long time ago that we were fighting such enormous Goliaths that if we were going to be the David and be able to slew them or influence them, the only way we could do that was by using modern technology, both to educate ourselves and our other people as public as well as members. So anybody who's interested in becoming part of our Friends of Freedom International, if you go to www.fofi.ca, we are Canadian-based, but we are global in terms of our list. We're massive as far as our technologies. Do you know my database has over 243,000 entries collected over 19 years?
That's amazing. So it does show that people are definitely gravitating towards this kind of movement.
Yes, and what we've done we have 2 free e-newses that people can subscribe to. One is mostly a positive, it's for informed freedom of choice, your risks and benefits. It's called the Health Freedom Natural News. And if you go to www.hfnn.ca, and it goes out to over 80,000 people each week. We send another edition out today. I can send you one to yourself so you can see it.
That'd be great. I'll go and register after the show.
It's meant to provide leading-edge information on a weekly basis to help people make decisions about, you mentioned vaccines earlier and other things like that. Now, in Canada, we also have, for those that are concerned with the Health Canada, we have a special Health Canada abuse. So we target Health Canada to prevent them bullying and harassing people. And we have an e-news that goes out once a month or so. And we have a website called Health Canada Abuse. It's www.healthcanadaabuse.ca. So for Canadians that want to help change Health Canada's behavior, that's where they can keep on touch of who we're writing to, who we're lobbying, what we're doing. And I know the U.S. has always been more effective at lobbying their Congress and senators than Canadians. Canadians tend to have a bit of a stay-at-home sheeple type of attitude. Mm-hmm. The Americans certainly are much more aggressive at having political influence, but we're trying to encourage Canadians to do so. We're also trying to encourage Americans to give us the mandate to deal with Codex and the things as an international non-government organization.
Excellent. So, very interesting. Very interesting. Now, how much power does Health Canada actually wield within the country and within the government itself?
Enormous. They're in my mind, I've been dealing with them literally for 40 years. and I deal with them every day of my life, and I've been actively lobbying and advocating against them since 1995. And Health Canada has about 9,700 people in it. It has, of all the government departments, it probably has more PhDs and master's degrees, highly educated people than any other Canadian government entity. And they basically have more discretionary power than the CSIS or the RCMP have. They're able to go into any business looking for safety issues with products, broad range, and they've been expanding their power to literally millions of products now. They're just growing into an ugly monster that just is unbelievable. I can't even believe we would allow it to exist today. That's part of what we're trying to stop with this Amend Bill C-17 campaign.
Mr. Tuck, I hear the music. We're going into a break. This is Mike Phillip, and we're having a fascinating conversation with Truman Tuck. We'll be back on the other side of these messages. Welcome back. We're live on Fire Your MD Now Radio. Now, Mr. Tuck, during the break, I got an email from one of the people that I deal with on a regular basis, and she's wanting to know what would be our course of action if one morning you wake up and, you know, we use longevity products. So one day, due to this Bill C-17, we can't get our stuff across the border. What would the course of action be to take?
Well, everybody who has any products coming into Canada today that does not have natural health product license numbers on them, whose source doesn't have a site license, either a natural health product or a DIN number, is at threat of being stopped at any time now. They've actually issued training memos and things indicating that September 1st, 2014 was their deadline to kind of start closing down the whole situation.
Very interesting.
What happens here, it's no different than what happened in the States when this was threatened in the early 90s. You need to go and support the activism into Parliament, because the only way you can stop the bureaucrat from irresponsibly acting is to change the legislation so that they can't do it anymore.
So the time to act is now, not after it happens.
Yes. It's inevitable that anybody who's importing products from the States now, particularly on any commercial scale, if they don't have the Health Canada blessing right now, will have problems.
Yeah, see, our stuff, the way it works right now with us is that it's illegal to sell commercially, but it's lawful to have for personal use. So would that put us under the same category?
They're changing that for the first time in Canadian history.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah.
They
are targeting what has happened, and this is where this whole story is so sad. The Canadian Health Food Association, which used to be our health food stores kind of protect us organization when I first became involved with it in the 70s and 80s.
Yep. It's
been taken over by Big Pharma and the big money interests. So it's actually helping Health Canada make these changes. And if you go to the Canadian Health Food Association website, you will find on that website one of their regulatory shopping list things is to stop the U.S. competition from unlicensed products.
So it's kind of a David versus Goliath situation, really. They've got seemingly unending funding. They've got the politicians and the courts in their pockets. But if you remember the story, David did win. So, I mean, there is hope, but we just got to pick up the ball and run with it.
Yeah. Well, to my knowledge, in Canada, our Friends of Freedom International, which is our consumer advocacy organization, was founded in 1995. We are the most active on these issues, and we've brought in on 4 or 5 different campaigns, 100, 200,000 petitions, and right now I think we're up to over 80,000 emails that have been generated through our current campaign. So Canadians who want to stop the drug categorization of our products in Canada must go to www.fofi.ca and send the Putting People First e-directive. It's automated. It goes to their MP. It goes to all senators, Canadian senators, and it goes to all members of the Canadian Parliament. So one push of the button, you've got over 400 emails going out.
Good job. Okay, so we only have a little bit of time left here. Could you speak a little bit about the FOFI Citizen Ruler Beehive?
Okay, well, basically, our concept is that the governments are corporations, so we view us as human beings, as Canadian citizens, as being the only voting shareholder that should exist in our government corporations. So it's about empowerment. So it's empowerment in one way to make your own decisions for your health, but you can't make your decisions about your health unless you can keep the government bullies and everything out of your face and out of your life or under
100%
control.
agreed. Mr. Tuck, thank you so very much for coming on the show. His name is Truman Tuck. Go to the Friends of Freedom International at FOFI.ca and look up the book Death by Modern Medicine on Amazon. Thank you once again for coming on the show, Mr. Tuck. We'll be taking your calls after this.